Hello and welcome to College Football Throwdown episode 55. I am your host, Alex Schmitz, and today I'm joined by my dad, Peter Schmitz.
Hey there, Husker fans and college football fans. It's number 55 already.
Yep, not bad, huh?
Wow, that's amazing.
Done a number of these things. And it's crazy to believe that here we are at the end of the regular season of college football.
I know.
It doesn't feel like it was that long ago that this all started.
I know. There's always a sadness for me when this weekend arrives and there's no longer a slate of games. I mean, you got the Army-Navy game that's going to happen this coming weekend, and the the Heisman Trophy award ceremony and stuff. But still, it's just a little bit sad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, it is. It's always a little sad. Well, and I had fun this weekend. I was jumping between. I was at a little Star Wars event here in LA, and then I jumped over to a bar to watch the Big Ten and the ACC championship games. So those were going on at the same time. So that was pretty fun. But for those of you who are new to the podcast, this is College Football Throwdown. We are a college football podcast by college football fans for college football fans. We talk about the sport in general, but also the Nebraska Cornhuskers, which we love. And there's some big news to talk about with them, as we predicted on the last podcast and was quite obvious to anybody paying attention, that Nebraska had a head coach in mind that they were going to offer. And this past Saturday, he accepted that offer, and it was officially announced that Scott Frost is the new head coach at the University of Nebraska.
Yes, absolutely. And it just it's really nice. It feels good. We've had, regretfully, to go through a few of these coaching fires and hires, changes, if you will, over the last 15 to 20 years now. I think this one feels a little different than the others, just because of that connection to home, to the fact that Scott understands the culture and the expectation, as well as the what he must deliver for Nebraska fans to be excited. And it's not just about, he's got to win championships and he's got to win a lot and all that. Obviously, that's the expectation of what people want, but it's also about the how we do it and what we want to demand of our student athletes that represent the school and the state, because we've worked hard to kind of establish that tradition. And we seem to have fallen away from that a little bit, and we've witnessed some teams that didn't seem to have quite the heart that we needed them to have. And so now we'll see if Scott's got the plan, so to speak, to make that happen.
Right. Well, and I was thinking back, I remember there being some excitement when Bo was hired, because Tom Osborne was in the AD seat choosing him, and he was one of the hot coordinators in the country. And he had what was it, after Frank Solich was fired, he coached us in the bowl game.
After Frank Solich was fired, well, he coached in Frank's last season, so he was the defensive coordinator on Nebraska staff the last season that Frank was in Lincoln.
Right, but
and then he had coached. Yes, he was the head coach after Frank was fired for the bowl game, but then did not get the job.
Correct.
Didn't really even get a legitimate interview, which pissed him off at the time. But then he did come back with Tom. And you're right. The closest thing I can say to this one was the Bo Pelini hire, and we certainly had great expectations and optimism about what Bo was going to be able to do. And frankly, Bo still had the potential to be a great collegiate head coach. He just failed in some personality and approach departments, if you will, that led to his demise as the head coach at Nebraska.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, we look back on that era, with some negativity, some disappointment. But at the same time, we still talk about, he won 9 games every year. That's nothing to sneeze at. For sure.
No, that's true. That's true. But there is an importance in how you do it, and the fact that you have to embrace the people of the state, because the people of the state first and foremost view the team as theirs. And so there has to be a collective mentality, and I think Scott understands that to a far greater extent than Bo ever did.
I definitely agree with that. So it was being reported that the deal that Scott got was a $35 million contract for 7 years. So $5 million a year, but more importantly, perhaps that 7 year time frame, which means that Bill Moos is seeing this as a more long-term commitment.
Correct, and he stated that actually in his press conference because obviously that was one of the questions, is why the contract and why the length of the contract and things like that. Because typically, for new head coaches, when they get hired, they get 5 years, and then it comes up with some kind of standard rolling 5 years where every year you get a 1 year extension that keeps you at 5 years, right? But I think Bill Moos's point in making it a 7 year contract was to convey publicly to everyone, including us fans as well as other teams and everyone, media, that this is a long term rebuild project. He recognizes that. Scott Frost recognizes that. And they're trying to set a tone of expectation that, hey, this isn't going to happen overnight. And that's something that I think, to some extent, our previous coach Mike Riley was poor at doing. Was he didn't understand when he needed to put a fire hose on expectations if he knew that he didn't have the goods. Whereas with him, everything tended to be all rosy, and there was all this great optimism, and there were all these positive comments and reports coming out of practices and spring practice and everything. I think Bill Moos and Scott are going to take much more of a guarded and measured approach in terms of how they communicate expectation.
Right. And since you were able to watch the press conference, maybe you can explain this to me, because Scott Frost, is going to coach the Peach Bowl game that UCF is now in after defeating Memphis here in their championship game and being the AAC champion. They're going to be playing Auburn in the Peach Bowl. And Scott Frost is going to coach that game. However, he's leaving game preparations to his offensive coordinator, who is currently the interim coach there at UCF. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes. And a number of the coaches on the staff are going to be splitting time between being down preparing the team and coaching the team in their preparation for the bowl game, as well as being on the road and making phone calls and that sort of stuff. So they're going to be flying all about. They'll be probably down in Florida during the week, coaching on any given day. I suspect they're going to have a certain number of an offensive and defensive coaches at every practice. Others will be on the road recruiting. Then that group will leave and the other group will go out. And, that'll be a couple of days they'll be at home or at their home, coordinating phone calls and, evaluating recruits and all that as they try to pull together a recruiting class out of this whole mess. Now, there is going to come a point here where a dead period will begin, so as to keep every coach off the road during the holiday season, and for all those coaches that are involved in bowl games, they're not viewing the bowl game as a disadvantage because the other coaches are out on the road recruiting. So they create a dead period where nobody can do that, right? And as a result, that makes this a little bit more doable because you're not falling behind, so to speak. You still got to make your phone calls and everything like that, and you don't get to do it 24/7 like the guys who aren't coaching a bowl game. But frankly, there's so many bowl games now that if your team's not in a bowl game, it means you kind of had a bad year. So those aren't the teams that we necessarily are too concerned about competing against, right? We want to be competing for athletes that are going to those types of schools that are being successful already. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, my question is, does this mean that UCF is going to hold off on hiring their new head coach until after this bowl game?
Oh, no. Okay. They're gonna hire their new coach so that new coach can immediately start putting his staff together and start building for the future. And in so doing, though, it was made clear by the athletic director at UCF that Danny White is his name, uh, it was made clear by him that Frost is going to coach along with his staff is going to coach the team because they collectively recognize that their best chance to have success and to compete in that game would be with Scott and his staff at the helm, right? You couldn't walk in to and have the new coach this team, particularly given the type of offensive system that's in place, right? This spread it out, throw the ball all over the place. I'll call it Oregon-based offense. Um,
Right.
is unique enough that if you were a traditional coach, you come in, you'd be asking your offensive linemen and your quarterbacks and wide receivers to do things that they have not practiced for the whole year. That does not put them in the best position to win or even compete in that game. Now, with all this being said, and I admire Scott for staying with it, I will be shocked, and I mean truly shocked, if at the end of the day, when game day comes for the Peach Bowl, that Scott is able to hang with 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 Auburn. If those guys do hang with Auburn, I don't mean win, but if they're just able to make it interesting, and let's say in the beginning of the fourth quarter, it's still undecided, that's a victory in my mind because they don't have the athletes to even compare on the field to Auburn, and so if they can find a way to do that with Auburn's great defensive talent, I would say that would be a huge, huge victory for Central Florida's perception and also for Scott Frost and his staff.
Yeah, no, I definitely would agree with you there. It's definitely going to be interesting because that just strikes me as such an odd, coaching situation where you have Scott Frost and his staff coaching UCF, but then also being at Nebraska, and then also having the new UCF coach and his staff there, but not coaching the team at the time. A lot of conflicting interests for sure.
Yeah.
But
Well, well,
it's a unique circumstance because Nebraska isn't going to a bowl game, and personally,
right.
I'm a little bit excited because it means I have something to cheer for in bowl
Yep.
season.
Exactly. Well, it will be a game with obviously where we'll have great interest. I just wish that he might have, it might have just fallen where he could have gotten a different team to play. Auburn was the worst choice they could have made for him. As opposed to some of the other teams that are in those New Year's Day 6 games, I sure would have liked him to be able to play maybe some of those other teams that was in that I believe he would have had a better chance of competing against. Frankly, him playing with his UCF team against Ohio State, for example, or USC might very well have been a more reasonable matchup than the Auburn one. I truly believe Auburn is that good, and it's just the way it fell because Auburn had, the losses that they have. They lost early in the season to Clemson. They lost
To LSU.
to LSU, and then and now to Georgia. So they've got 3 losses, and so that's why they kind of put themselves in that situation. But from what I test as they now as a common statement, my eye test says Auburn is an extremely talented team that only a few teams could compete with, and Georgia obviously being one of them, and Clemson,
Yep.
who are both in the college football playoff.
Right. Exactly. No, I agree with you there. It's going to be an interesting game for sure. Now, like I said, I wasn't able to watch the press conference. What was your impression of Bill Moos and Scott at that, as well as what you've seen just here in these first couple days in terms of them offering recruits scholarships and things of that nature?
Right. Okay. So first of all, press conference. I think overall, absolute home run. Both both athletic director Moose and Scott seemed quite comfortable. Scott was clearly shaken and choked up, and I'll get into a little bit of why that was a little later. But Bill Moose was smooth as silk. He was very comfortable. He cracked a few jokes, gave a little bit of insight, kind of answered some speculative questions. there was rumor of a meeting between he and Scott Frost that took place in Philadelphia during the weekend that we played Penn State, and Scott Frost was team was playing Temple, and so it was a natural fit that would have been a convenient time for them to maybe meet. And of course, there was never an acknowledgement that meeting occurred. Um, and Bill Moose made some comment about having some good sandwiches in Philadelphia at the time, and then he cracked a joke during the press conference where he said, yes, there was great conversation and all this stuff, and they were good sandwiches. So that was kind of his way of saying, okay, guys, I can tell you the rest of the story. So anyway, but he just handled it very good. He just seemed so comfortable. It's like he was. I mean, I think I've read this already that literally the day he and his wife arrived on campus, uh, it felt like they had been lifelong Nebraskans. They just fit. He is very comfortable, and he has the right mentality. And I think he is going to be well liked by Nebraska faithful.
Yeah.
And so anyway, he handled it very well. He answered the questions honestly and accurately, but he explained some of the nuance about some things too that I think is reflective of his gravitas, his history as an AD. He wanted to make clear, hey, this is what I'm telling you, or this is what I'm sharing with you, and don't think it's that. And he even was willing to acknowledge or take a few liberties, if you will, about how nice the whole process went for him versus how it's gone for some other major programs, i.e., Tennessee. So he made a nudge that way to kind of point out that hey, this is not an easy process, and this went about as smooth as possible. And his focus was on respecting Scott and his timeline and what he had going on with his team, and just taking it as it comes. He says, you notice all these guys that fired their coaches early, like Texas A&M and Tennessee, who fired their coaches early in the season or earlier before we did, and they still were looking for coaches. Now, obviously, A&M, did fill theirs eventually, but the fact is firing a coach mid-season does not necessarily help you unless you already have something predefined in place.
Right.
You know.
Yeah.
So anyway, it was just really good. Now to Frost, I thought he handled things well. You could tell he was choked up, and the reason for that was, again, this is a nice move by Bill Moos. Obviously, he couldn't let the cat out of the bag too soon, because then it would get all over the social media things. He couldn't trust everyone who he wanted to potentially invite, but he extended an invitation to any and all past players of Nebraska football, particularly those obviously that played with Scott in the years that he was there. And in literally about a 24-hour notice, because he didn't make this invitation until that time, because he didn't want it to happen too soon. Does that make sense?
Right.
Okay, so he puts out the invitation, and he got 150 players to show up.
Wow.
To welcome Scott home. So Scott walks into the building and towards the strength weight room there, and there are 150 guys standing in there waiting for him to welcome him. And so that scene's pretty powerful, and it's on YouTube and stuff now. So you should take a look at it if you haven't had the chance to watch it. It's fairly short, and then Scott had one of the lines of the press conference. He said, "I tell you, it was." He said, two things immediately came to my mind when I saw those guys is, number one, it sure was great to see all of them. And number two, it looked like most of them had a little bit too much to eat. Something along those lines. He delivered it much more smoothly than I just did. But the bottom line is you can tell that Scott has kind of a dry sense of humor, and he likes to poke fun and have fun. And so that's that competitive aspect of things that is very team-like, and I love to hear it. It was a little. He specifically thanked Tom Osborne and Matt Davison. It was clear that Matt, particularly, and Tom, just because of his advisory role for Scott, Scott indicated that Tom has been his advisor for most of his life, and I had forgotten this, but Scott grew up literally hanging out on the track at Nebraska because his mom was the track coach at Nebraska, and so when he was a little kid, he was connected and knew Tom Osborne even then. So Scott and he go way back, and is probably one of the most influential people in his life, other than maybe his own dad. So that was kind of cool, and so that he's gonna be getting advice when he needs it. Um,
Right.
and I think he won't be afraid to go ask for it. See, again, going back to the Bo Pelini, I think most Nebraskans felt that that Bo would respect Tom in the way that we do, and Bo would lean on Tom's advice and then take it to heart. Bo appeared not to do that very often. Most of the time, I think things went in one ear and out the other when it came to Tom Osborne providing advice to him.
Right. Well, and I also read that Bill Moos consulted with Tom a little bit, at least, during this coaching search, and I'm sure
Oh,
Tom had kind
absolutely.
words for Frost.
Yes, absolutely. Well, and Scott, again, another comment during the press conference was, Scott said, I knew that if Tom didn't think this was the right time, or that the things weren't in place for me to be successful at Nebraska, he would not have advised me to take this job, even though it was the Nebraska job. So it wasn't just about it being the Nebraska job. It was about the fact that it was the Nebraska job at the right time. And he referenced the fact that, you know, the president and chancellor of the university are the right people at this time. That wasn't necessarily true 3 years ago. He specifically talked about the last time that this job was open, and there was some speculation that Scott might have been a candidate at that time, but he was actually glad he wasn't a candidate at that time because the fit wasn't there. It is now because of Moose being there, and then Ronnie Green and oh gosh, the other one's escaping me of the three key guys. So it just sounds like everybody's on the same page, for what we want to accomplish going forward, and that the support that he's going to need. And he got not only a big paycheck for himself, but he does have a budget of almost $5 million for additional staff, $5 million a year. So he can spend considerable amount of money on his two coordinators and still have quite a bit left for his coaching staff, and then and do what he needs to do
Right.
in terms of
And
recruiting staff and strength and conditioning staff and all that.
Right. And speaking of that, correct me if I'm wrong again, but I believe that basically his whole staff from UCF is coming over except for the offensive coordinator and the tight ends coach. Is that right?
That's correct. That's correct. The strength coaches are coming over. A couple of the recruiting guys are coming over. Yeah, there is a lot of the people that he had put in place with him. And again, his feeling, and he made reference to this. He said, a lot of coaches, take the opportunity when they switch jobs to go out there and get a bunch of big name hires from assistant coaches. He says, this group of coaches, I believe in, I trust them. They have the character, and they know how to treat the players, and all those things that Scott holds in very high value. These guys do, and so he felt very confident that they had the ability to duplicate the success they've had at UCF here in Lincoln.
Yep.
And
Well,
so he wasn't about to leave any of them behind per se. He thought they all did their jobs well.
right. Yeah. Well, and it's hard to question the staff that's led this team to be undefeated and go from 0-12 to 12-0 in just 2 years. Now, there is some concern. We've expressed this as well in the past on our podcast about the defensive coordinator, considering that they've had a couple of really big, high-scoring, crazy games.
Yeah,
This Memphis
yeah,
game included.
yeah.
So we that was our big concern, was we're not worried about the offensive coordinator so much, but the defensive coordinator.
Correct. And obviously Scott being on the offensive side himself, and being involved heavily in calling the plays and such, he's going to be able to guide. It's going to be his his version of the Chip Kelly offense that's going to be run here, and so that's obviously what's going to happen. So whoever is the offensive coordinator is going to be of that mindset as well, right? I mean, one way or another, that's the way it's going to be. Defensively, a little different story. Yeah, I would say that I continue to have that concern, and only after the next. I won't say the first year because I think we're going to struggle mightily in the first year. But as I see multiple years happening from here on out, I am hopeful and optimistic that we'll see progress. And that's what I want to see. I want to see those players show progress. The one thing I will say is that we did generally see pretty decent tackling from those teams when I watched his team play. They tackled reasonably well. And our team didn't tackle worth a crap. So
Yeah.
I'm hopeful that will happen. Although it's going to be really interesting to see UCF's defense defend Auburn because Auburn has some powerful running backs, and I'll be curious to see how many tackles those guys break on UCF defenders.
Yep.
I have a feeling it might be substantial.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Well,
mean,
yeah.
the thing is, he's just taking up. Not only is he taking a step up into the big boy league for this game, which obviously, if you're playing in a New Year's Day game, that's the way it goes. But this particular Auburn team, I think, is better than their record would indicate.
Well, we'll talk about that in the rankings because I have a thought about that. But overall, let's just get personal feelings right now. This wasn't a surprise to anybody really. We've been
No,
Scott Frost was the guy everyone was talking about. Even like the middle of the season, and he was clearly Bill Moose's number one choice. And now here he is. He's got this undefeated UCF team that he's going to lead to the bowl game to possibly make it a 13-0,
yeah.
true
Oh
legendary
my,
season.
oh my,
You
yeah.
know,
Well, again to beat Auburn, that would be huge. That would be just a major statement.
right. And like we said, not likely to happen, but I think that's part of the factor of why he's continuing. A, because Nebraska we don't have our own bowl game, and B, because he beat Memphis and because he has that undefeated record, it gives some extra stakes to like the importance of the season for him and for
Right,
that team.
right,
But I
exactly.
am definitely optimistic. I'm excited. I'm happy that we've got this hot young coach, talented young coach here in Nebraska. A Nebraska guy kind of coming back home. Like you said, I saw those pictures of like the stadium lit up with like "Welcome Home, Scott" and stuff like that. And so like you say, the fan base is into it. So
Yep,
which they
yep.
weren't necessarily for Mike Riley because it was just kind of an out of nowhere hire. So this has all the makings of being the right choice, but at the same time, he is very young. He hasn't been a head coach at anywhere near a program of Nebraska's level before. So, and he's in the Big Ten now, so there's going to be a lot of adjustments. And like you say, we have a tough schedule next year. So I'm expecting a growing pains year for sure. But I am hopeful that this is going to lead us in the right direction.
Yes, I would agree completely with what you said. And I would say this I will even go maybe a couple of steps further. I think the way that our athletic director has approached this whole thing has been outstanding. He's gained a great deal of respect from me on how he's come in to a difficult situation and managed it. I think I agree with Scott in that I believe that the commitment and the desire for us to reemerge as a significant player in football is a goal of all the key people at the highest levels of the university, including the president and the chancellor, as well as the entire athletic department. So there's a single-minded focus there that I don't think necessarily has been there in the past over the last 20 years, and so I'm prepared to say that even though Scott Frost is going to run an offense that I don't love, he doesn't. I mean, that Oregon thing drives me nuts. But I will have to acknowledge that it's been very successful, both for Oregon and for some other teams that have done it well, including UCF. And it lends itself to putting the defense in a lot of difficult situations. So your defense is never going to statistically be dominant the way I would like to see our defense be dominant. But with those two things being said, I'm going to tell you two things. Number one, I'm going to go on record in this podcast right now and say I am in with Scott Frost. I am going to be patient. I'm prepared to be patient, and I recognize that this is a rebuild. It's not a reload or, gee, there's some talent on this team. We might be pretty good pretty quick or something like that. No, I'm not buying any of that. The bottom line here is this is a rebuild, and we've got to give Scott every kind of opportunity to do that. And he's going to make some mistakes. Some of these coaching hires that he's making now, for example, they won't work out. They won't pan out. They won't be as good as is needed for us to be successful. And even if Scott doesn't immediately recognize that and make that change himself, I'm not going to bail on him. Scott's my guy, and he's my guy for the 7 years. We got to make this work.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's the thing with that 7-year contract. We were kind of gambling, like, we've had this period of, 20 years of mediocrity or whatever it is. Just about 20 years of mediocrity. We need, this is the time now. Is what Bill and Moose is saying. Like, this is when we're going to turn the corner. And if we don't, we're going to be paying Scott Frost a lot of money for his for his contract.
Right. Exactly.
So I hope the commitment works out. Okay, so getting off the Nebraska conversation, we've got a whole bunch of national stuff to talk about as well.
Yes.
Because we had the big championship games, and we gave predictions on the last podcast about how we thought they were going to turn out. And so how we did it was we said who we thought was going to win and close or blowout. Blowout being 14 points or more was the thinking. So I'm going to go through what we said and what the actual game was and who wins out in our little predictions here at the end. So we had the Pac-12 championship game of USC-Stanford. You and I both predicted a close victory for Stanford,
Yes.
partially because of their dominant win over Notre Dame the previous week. But then USC ended up winning 31-28 in a close game that Stanford had the chance to win. We were both watching it. There was a 4th and 1 at the goal line that they didn't get, or something.
Well, and I would argue that they did get it. I would argue that in today's modern era of how they define the end of a play, that guy got into the end zone because he never actually was on the ground. He was laying on a leg, and then he backed into the end zone, and the ball crossed the plane. And the refs, according to what I've watched all season, should have allowed that play to continue and should not have blown that whistle until he actually touched the ground. So
right,
and then they would have gone and lead right there, and the whole thing changes. The whole circumstance changes. In that.
Or as it turns out, even there, if they had kicked a field goal instead, that would have tied the game.
Right, that's right.
With the 8 points they got later. So now for that, since we both said Stanford close, so it was a close game, so we got that right, but Stanford lost, USC won, so we both lose half a point for that. Okay, this is that ranking thing I was telling you about.
Yeah, okay.
Then we have Oklahoma TCU, which we both predicted an Oklahoma blowout, which turned out to be correct. Baker Mayfield had an amazing day. He's going to win the Heisman without a doubt. Stuff TCU, they were playing them for the second time, so not too surprising there. And then we had the Wisconsin-Ohio State game of great interest to us. Both of us going with our hearts, I think, more than our minds, and predicting a close Wisconsin victory because we both wanted it badly to get that Big Ten team into the top 4 and to keep Alabama out and all that. But in the end, Ohio State ended up winning 27-21 with Wisconsin pulling it back in the second half but not being able to close it out.
Right, exactly. And really, you saw with the big plays that were the difference in the game for Ohio State, just the sheer athletic difference between Wisconsin and Ohio State. Ohio State really didn't play all that well. They had some individual plays where they took advantage of Wisconsin being out of position, etc. And then Wisconsin just didn't have the athletes and speed to even be on the field with them. I mean, it was almost embarrassing how one-sided that athletic aspect was. And
Right.
yet there was Wisconsin still in it at the end
Yeah.
because they play so hard and they play so consistently well, that even without the premier athletes, they can compete.
Right.
Um,
Well, and
it's really
their
impressive.
yeah, their defense got some big interceptions.
Hmm.
JT Barrett, there were some drop passes as well as missed passes by him, that were like touchdowns, that he just missed or he overthrew his guy. So
Right.
Ohio State definitely made their fair share of mistakes. And I could also tell that Ohio State was kind of loading up the box and daring Hornibrook to throw it. And there near the end of the game, when like time was running out and Wisconsin had to throw it, his lack of ability to consistently make good passes came back to bite them.
That's true. I totally agree.
All right, and so that was one, and then we have now. Going with all that, we both said Wisconsin close, like I said, so we both lost there, so we both lose half a point for that. We won 1 point for Oklahoma blowout since we got that right, both Oklahoma winning and the blowout factor, so that's 1 point. So now we're both
Okay.
back to zero in terms of
Okay.
points. Then we get to Miami versus Clemson. And this was
Yes.
an interesting one. We both predicted a Clemson victory, but I predicted that Clemson would win close, whereas you predicted a Clemson blowout. So
Right.
you are correct there because Clemson ended up winning 3-38, a total spanking of Miami.
Right. It was really a disappointing game from the standpoint that I was geared up to, be flipping back and forth between the two games that night. And I mean, before you knew it, it was 21-0 Clemson. It was like, man, this may not be much of anything.
Yeah. Yeah, and like I said, I was at a bar, so both games were going on. But yeah, I didn't glance over to that game too much. There were so many times where it was like Clemson fumbled it again. It was like, what again? Like, how do they keep turning the ball over? It was starting to get kind of silly. And we have to talk about this in the Wisconsin Ohio State game. The field turf came
Oh
undone.
yes, yes.
Were you having fun with that? Because we were
Oh
just
my God.
joking, like when they drew the little line on the screen, like where the thing was, and they stayed on him for like 7 minutes. It was insane.
That was crazy.
Yeah,
That was absolutely crazy.
yeah. The internet had a lot of fun with that one, I'm sure. So there, you take a lead because I get half a point for Clemson close, whereas you get a full point for predicting the Clemson blowout. But now we
Okay.
get to the deciding factor, the Auburn Georgia game, where I predicted Georgia winning close, whereas you predicted Auburn winning close.
Right.
So Auburn did not win, and it was not close. So you lose a full point for that, whereas Georgia won, and it was not close. So I only get half a point for that. But that means that I end up having half a point more than you in this ranking overall. So I win in this predictions because
I see.
Georgia ended up winning 28-7. Not as dominant as the Clemson Miami game, but still one where Auburn just couldn't seem to get their offense going at all.
Right. I know. Yeah, it was. I knew that there were injuries and things of that nature that were affecting, the team. But man, I really expected Auburn to play better.
Right.
That just tells you how hard it is to, play your best every week. And they, remember, had just played the previous week in the Iron Bowl
Right.
against Alabama and had that grand victory. And it's just really hard to do that.
Right. Well, and I had brought up at the time that I knew that their star running back had gotten hurt in that game, and he played in the Georgia game, but he was on and off, and I think it was clear he
Right.
was still hurt.
Right. I agree.
Yeah.
Yep.
All
Now
right.
Georgia's running backs were also hurt though,
That's true.
and they were going in and out of their injury tent all game too.
Yep, that's true. All right. And then lastly, UCF Memphis ended up being a 62-55 victory in double overtime. I didn't get to watch that game, but sounds like it was a kind of like the UCF game from last week. It was another high-scoring, back and forth battle.
Oh yes. Oh my gosh, and double overtime too. I mean, yeah, it was ridiculous. Now there were times when it seemed like UCF might have an advantage, but they never could put it all together, and it was just rare that either team actually stopped the other one, and
Hmm.
that was not a time that makes me excited about our defensive coordinator.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, it's a
Well,
little scary.
it is a little scary for sure. We'll see. We'll see. Um,
Yeah.
but now, of course, then this brings up because Wisconsin had to win to make it easy for the committee. But since they lost, and if TCU had beaten Oklahoma, that would have made it interesting. But since Wisconsin lost and Ohio State won, that became the great debate of who's more deserving: a two-loss Ohio State conference champion or a one-loss Alabama. And when the rankings came out, it was Clemson 1, Oklahoma 2, Georgia 3, and Alabama number 4.
Right.
I did not watch the event itself, but I heard them talking on the radio this morning about the committee's thinking on it was that because in large part due to that bad loss to Iowa that Ohio
Right.
State had, as well as
Yep.
Alabama's dominance in terms of the stats lines and the whole eye test of like if these two teams played, we think Alabama
Yeah.
would win and that sort of thing.
Right. And you know what? I can't argue with any of that. And you're especially when you're really splitting hairs on. You could make an argument about, well, Ohio State played more teams that were legitimate opponents, blah blah blah, because Alabama's schedule was quite soft. But the reality is Alabama dominated the teams they were supposed to dominate pretty much across the board. They had incredible statistical, success, and so that's all part of that eye test that people refer to.
And,
Can't argue. Can't argue with it.
yep. It's hard to argue with the point, as well as the fact that they didn't know that Florida State was going to be as bad as they were this year. That could have been a
Right.
marquee out of
Victory.
conference game for them, like the Oklahoma game was for Ohio State.
Right. Exactly.
And we were discussing that if Ohio State had like blown Wisconsin out, like if it was 38-3 like the Clemson game was, then it might have been different. But that's not how it turned out. It was a close game. Like you said, Ohio State didn't play that great, so not a great look for the committee. Which means that our semifinal games of the college football playoff is going to be the Rose Bowl game with Georgia and Oklahoma, and the Sugar Bowl game with Alabama and Clemson. And personally, even though I didn't want Alabama to get in, and because this presents the possibility of a SEC Alabama Georgia national championship
Final.
game, I
Yep.
am excited just as a fan to watch the tiebreaker between Alabama and Clemson, just because those last two games between those two were so great. And if they could give us a third one as good as those, I'll be happy.
Well, yeah, but I'm going to tell you the opposite now. It's frustrating to me and I know they just went with the exact seeding 1 through 4, but I wish they would have given, because I think that it's a slap in the face to Clemson, frankly, because now Clemson's going to play Alabama basically in the heart of SEC territory in the traditional conference championship game where there's all kinds of lore and history and connections between Alabama and that town of New Orleans. So it's crazy. You know what I mean? I just think it gives you might as well be ranked number 4, Clemson, because you got the worst draw of the whole deal, having to play Alabama at the Sugar Bowl. I think they should have manipulated the rankings if they had to, or just flat out said, here are the rankings, but here's how they're going to be used to set up the matchups. And because we chose to have 2 SEC teams, we want to make sure that we do not have an all SEC final game,
Right.
because you want to make college football a regional sport again. You just keep making these kinds of decisions, and eventually the northern schools, their fan bases will lose interest because there won't be enough success with northern teams over time, and then success breeds success, and it snowballs. It's the Alabama thing to the hilt, okay? Where he has now got it rolling in such a way that until the NCAA catches him breaking the rules or something like that derails him, or he decides to retire, Alabama is going to be in this playoff every damn year. And that's
Right.
just the way it's going to be. And frankly, Clemson is putting themselves in a position where they might very well be that kind of team as long as their coaching staff stays stable and they can continue to recruit at a high level. They're going
Right.
to be in it every year, and
Right.
and that's not good for the sport. That makes it a regional interest, and the SEC championship, the SEC only national championship game that's likely to occur is going to be watched by fewer people
Right.
because
However,
no
well,
one's going to give a shit.
but you could make the argument that so if they had done an Alabama Georgia playoff game,
Which I
in
wish
this
they should have.
in the semifinal, but then you're guaranteeing, okay, well now we're gonna have one game that's an SEC game that less people are going to be interested in, whereas as it stands now, we could have a Clemson Oklahoma national championship game where
Or
we have
Clemson, Georgia.
right
Yeah,
there are
yeah,
variations here where
yeah,
you know
yeah.
it plays
Yep.
out that way.
I understand.
Yeah, so I think the committee did the right thing in terms of if they had like ranked Bama somehow
No, I
way
don't.
above.
I would have wanted them to force this because they're going to get the all SEC championship. Alabama's not losing again. I'm telling you, they're not. It just pisses me off.
I don't know.
I despise them because they are so good. I hate Nick Saban because of the choices that have been made. Hate is a strong word. I dislike him because of the choices that he was able to successfully implement within his program that have now become standard for teams that want to play at the highest level. And I think they have been negatives for the overall sport.
Right.
And as a result, he's going to have the players where they need him to be. And I want Clemson to win that game so bad it ain't funny.
Right. Well, I'll definitely be cheering for them too. I was just reminded as well that we're actually going to be in New Orleans around that time. Uh,
We
so
absolutely will be in New Orleans for that game.
yeah, so that would
So
be maybe
so
we don't go to
if
the game itself, but we go to like the screen outside the
pre
stadium or something like
absolutely,
that.
absolutely. I'm thinking we're going to want to try to do something like that.
Yeah.
Isn't that exciting?
Yeah, although I'll have to check my flight because I might be. I feel like I'm flying back on the second. I'm almost certain, but I'll have to check on that.
Yeah.
But regardless, so and then with the other rankings, I thought this was interesting. Ohio State 5, Wisconsin 6. Wisconsin didn't fall too far. Them giving them props for playing tough with Ohio State, I think.
Right.
Then number 7 Auburn, number 8 USC, 9 Penn State, 10 UCF. That's where I thought UCF might end up last week, so I got that right. But Auburn being above USC, even though USC is a conference champion and Auburn has 3 losses, I'm not sure how
Yeah.
I feel about that.
I don't love that either. But again, it's because Auburn beat Georgia and Alabama. So you look to the top of the heap and you say, okay, they beat
Number 1
both
twice.
teams when they were number one. Yeah, and teams that after all the chips were on the table, those two teams were still number two and number four, right? And so those teams that they beat were substantial,
Yep.
and that's why. And you look at SC and their schedule, and they beat Notre Dame, and of course they beat the best of the back of the Pac-12,
Right.
but that's all that they did, and that doesn't rise to the level of Georgia and Alabama.
Right. Yep, that's true. And so last thing I wanted to talk about here is just a little bit of the coaching carousel stuff, because as we were discussing last week, Jimbo Fisher did end up going to Texas A&M for a crazy amount of money, like the highest single contract ever for a coach. And that there's rumors that Kevin Sumlin, the former coach at Texas A&M, is going to possibly go to UCF.
Correct. That is true. Well, he's certainly one that'll be on their radar. Now, it's interesting based on the athletic director at UCF's comments. Someone does have a little bit of baggage that might present a little bit of a challenge for him, but I would not be shocked at all if that were the end result. Now, I am shocked that a coach who had the head coaching job at Florida State University, who had won a national championship while the coach there, left that university to go to Texas A&M. To me, that's a bonehead choice. I understand you're getting paid, $7.5 million, but you were getting paid pretty damn well. I think 5 or 5.5 a year at Florida State. So it's not like money wise, there's that big a deal there, right? I mean, how much more do you need, kind of thing.
Right.
So I think the decision by Jimbo Fisher to go into the Texas A&M role is going to be a mistake for him. I just, not that he won't be a successful coach. He might be a very successful coach there, but is he going to be a national champ successful coach? I think that's to be determined.
Right. And I was talking last week about how I thought it was crazy that this was coming up, considering that he won a national championship and won so many conference championships and has a great record there overall. But I think that just from looking at a couple articles and headlines, it seems there's more going on there in terms of some stuff he did with the players and disagreements with the administration and things of that nature that complicated the issue.
That is correct. I think that is exactly true. There was more there. There were unhappy players because they had a difficult year and some things had happened or been said or whatever that were hard to kind of easily clean up out of. And so I think he saw the writing on the wall that things were going to get worse rather than getting better. And so he saw this as a chance to get out.
Right. Okay. So, and I was just thinking about what we should do for next time, because now we're getting into we're not in the off season yet, but we're getting, into that time. We just got all the bowl games really ahead of us in the championships and all that. So I'm thinking maybe for our next podcast or the one after that, we should go over like all the big bowl games and maybe give some predictions as well as for the semifinal games and all that stuff, as well as whatever Scott Frost Nebraska related news has come up.
Yes, I absolutely agree. We didn't really touch extensively on the individual coaches of Nebraska staff, and we can do that on the next podcast as well as preview all the bowl games.
Yep. Still a lot to talk about here at College Football Throwdown. So if you all out there enjoyed listening to this podcast, you can find us online at footballthrowdown.podomatic.com. You can leave a comment there and subscribe to the podcast, or you can subscribe to us on iTunes, leave us a rating or review, let us know what you think of us. You can email us at huskerpete13@gmail.com if you'd like to reach out and hear your email read live on the show and have us answer your questions. So thank you out there for listening to this episode, and thank you, Dad, for being with me. And it's a frosty day in Lincoln, so go Big Red.
Go Big Red. Brr.